Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD bodybuilder, back with another video. Today we're going to be talking about body recomposition. So a brief outline for today. First, what is body recomposition? Then who is it for? How do you do it? And finally, what are some limitations? So you've probably heard your local gym bro talking about his bulk and cut phases. Basically, during a bulking cycle, you're putting on a lot of weight in order to build muscle. And during a cutting cycle, you lose weight in an attempt to lose fat. Now for some of these bros, their weight might fluctuate between a very wide range between their bulk and cut cycles. Is this really necessary? The answer is no. In fact, in a lot of cases, I would actually argue that it's detrimental for people since they end up putting on a lot of excess fat during their bulk phase since they gain weight too quickly. And during their cut phases, they often end up losing a lot of lean tissue since they aren't dieting correctly, which means they end up back at square one at the end of it without really making progress in terms of putting on lean muscle mass. So now let's talk about body recomposition. Body recomposition refers to the process of building muscle and losing fat at the same time. Now, a lot of bodybuilders talk about this like it's some sort of mythical process that's actually impossible. In actuality, building muscle and losing fat are separate processes that are somewhat independent. Now, it's actually been shown in multiple studies that people have been able to gain lean tissue while actually losing weight. So to set the record straight, body recomposition is possible and has been demonstrated in numerous scientific studies. Now, this doesn't exactly apply to everyone. It really works best for certain populations, and we're going to talk about those now. Okay, so which populations are able to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, or recomp? First of all, I'll say that resistance training is absolutely key, mainly because this is the most efficient way for you to provide that muscle building stimulus. Next, I'm going to introduce an overarching principle that links together all of the different populations where body recomposition makes sense. My overarching principle is that in order for you to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, you need to present a novel and superior stimulus. In other words, you have to be doing something that's new and better than what you were doing before. Body recomposition isn't easy to accomplish, and that's why you need to satisfy this overarching principle. There are four main categories of people who satisfy this overarching principle. You've got beginners and some intermediates, detrained athletes, people with suboptimal training and diet, and enhanced athletes. Let's dive a little bit deeper into these. So for the first category, for beginners and early intermediates, since your body is relatively new to the dieting and training for bodybuilding thing, it's able to build muscle quite quickly despite the fact that you might also be losing fat. This basically fits into the commonly termed phenomenon of newbie gains, where people find that in their beginning phases of bodybuilding, they put on muscle very easily. So for a beginner, even if your calories are set at a level where you're maintaining your body weight or even losing body weight, your body is so sensitive to that muscle building stimulus of lifting weights that you're probably going to build muscle anyways. Now, when I talk about beginners, I'm generally referring to people in their first 1 to 2 years of serious training. Now, the second category is detrained athletes. In other words, athletes returning from a long layoff from training. When people take more than a couple of weeks off of training, they often find that they lose some lean tissue mass. When you get back into consistent training, that muscle comes back. Now, I think in a lot of cases, this is just due to regaining the muscle that you lost, not that you're actually producing new muscle. You could even argue that the muscle hasn't really gone away. So for this category, you're producing a novel and superior stimulus to what you were doing before, which was taking time off. Your body becomes resensitized to the training stimulus, and when you apply it again, it responds by building muscle very easily. Now, I'll note that in this category of detrained athletes, the recomposition effect only lasts for a limited period of time. Once you get back to the level of muscle mass you were at before, or a bit beyond that, things are likely to go back to the old rate of progress. Now, category number 3 is people with suboptimal training and diet. In other words, if your training and diet regimen are not perfect and you improve some aspect of it, you are in effect applying a novel and superior stimulus, which satisfies our overarching principle, and thus you're probably able to build muscle and lose fat simultaneously. For training, this means optimizing the different training variables using scientific principles, which we'll talk about later. For dieting, this often means developing an awareness for tracking your macros and your calories and aiming for concrete macro targets. Now, the last category is enhanced athletes or people using performance-enhancing drugs. Now, since I mainly deal with natural bodybuilding, we're not going to go into this in much detail here, but I just wanted to mention it because you're going to hear a lot of things from pro bodybuilders, say in the IFBB, or famous people on Instagram, talking about how they were able to gain a lot of muscle and lose fat at the same time during their contest prep as highly advanced athletes. And while it might have been possible for them, the drugs they use actually alters their physiology, which makes it easier for them to continuously build muscle while still losing fat. So remember that just because some professional bodybuilder you see online is able to do it, doesn't mean it applies to you. So now that we've outlined the 4 categories of lifters that satisfy our overarching principle, I want to point out that this actually applies to the vast majority of the lifting population. If you walk into any commercial gym, most people you see working out there will fall into one of these categories. Namely, most of them will be beginners and early intermediates, or people who haven't perfected their training and diet. Alright, so now that we've talked about the categories of people who can effectively gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, how do you do this? First of all, I'll say that for the people who fall into those 4 categories of people who are able to produce a novel and superior shift in their program, body recomposition is actually a very efficient way to go, especially if you're a beginner where your body fat is at a higher point than where you want it to be. Going for an approach where you build muscle and lose fat at the same time is probably going to be a very efficient way to get there. So in order to recomp, you're going to have to optimize your training and nutrition. Now, obviously we can't cover all of this in one video because this is basically the entire field of bodybuilding and it's everything my channel is about. So you'll have a better understanding of this if you watched all my videos and are up to date with the evidence-based approach to bodybuilding. In a nutshell, for training, you need to have mastered the concepts of consistency, progressive overload, volume, frequency, intensity and rep ranges, and exercise selection in order to put together an optimal training program. If you aren't completely sure about how those variables fit into a training program and how to individualize them for yourself, check out my Basics of Training series, where I have a video dedicated to each one of those. As I just mentioned, all of those training variables need to be individualized for you. What that means is you're going to have to do some experimentation with different types of programming in order to really optimize your training. If some personal trainer or online coach writes you a program and gives it to you point blank and tells you to just carry out this program as the be all and end all, that's definitely not the ideal program for you because it fails to take in the importance of individualization for each of these training variables. As a really quick summary of my personal recommendations in terms of the training variables in your program, you should be progressively overloading in your multi-set 6 to 12 rep max, which means slowly adding weight over time over multiple sets in the 6 to 12 rep range. For volume, you should probably be aiming for about 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. For frequency, you should be hitting a muscle at least twice per week. For intensity, your relative intensity, or how close you push to failure, should be to about 1 to 2 reps in reserve, and you should put the majority of your training in the 6 to 12 rep range with about a third of your volume outside of that rep range. And for exercise selection, you should focus on multi-joint, heavy compound basic movements for the majority of your training volume. Now, in terms of nutrition, the first thing is that you should be aiming for a minimum protein target. My current minimum recommendation for protein is 0.82 to 1 grams per pound of body weight per day, or 1.8 to 2.2 grams per kilo. If you want to delve deeper into that, check out my video on protein that I uploaded last. In terms of the specific ratio of carbs to fats, I wouldn't stress too much about these. You generally want to be shooting for a low to moderate fat intake and the rest carbs. For overall energy intake, you should be aiming for maintenance calories, which means your total calories should be at a level where your body weight is staying stable. So in practical terms, set your nutrition so that you're maintaining your body weight, training optimally, and then look in the mirror to look for visual changes. If you see yourself slowly getting bigger and or getting more defined at the same body weight, you're probably building muscle and losing fat at the same time. Now, in terms of limitations of body recomposition, I've mentioned before that it's not an easy thing to accomplish. Building muscle and losing fat at the same time doesn't apply to everyone. Namely, for more experienced athletes, this may produce slower results than a program with structured bulking and cutting phases. The reason is that it's relatively harder for the body to build muscle than it is for it to lose fat. If you really know how to structure a massing phase and a fat loss phase according to scientific principles, you may see faster progress with a more phasic approach. That being said, for people who are beginners or are overweight, I still would recommend aiming for body recomposition as your initial plan of attack. Now, extending this a bit further, for advanced bodybuilders, people who have been training for years and have their training, nutrition, and recovery all dialed in a way that's optimized and individualized for themselves, are not really going to be able to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. So in this case, that local gym bro who is telling you that you've really got to bulk and cut in order to see progress is actually right. In summary, for natural athletes, building muscle and losing fat in the same time is possible and has been shown in the scientific literature. And the overarching principle is that you need to present a novel and superior stimulus. This only applies to certain populations, but it actually encompasses the vast majority of lifters. In order to recomp, you should optimize your training, nutrition, set your calories at maintenance, and if that doesn't work, and once you've optimized everything with years of individualization and you're an advanced athlete, body recomposition probably isn't for you. That's all for now, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you hit like. If you want a full training program, check out my playlist on workout splits, where I actually go through a few full bodybuilding programs that are science-based and gives you a place to start in terms of a full body program, upper lower split, and push-pull legs. Now, body recomposition is pretty tough, so if you've had success in building muscle and losing fat at the same time, comment below. I'd love to hear about your experience. If you haven't already, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.